Are you ready for me to answer the commonly asked questions I got when it came to starting a virtual assistant business? In this video, I'm going to deep dive a few of the questions that I got after my last video of how to open or how to start a virtual assistant business in 2025. And I got a lot of them. We'll start diving through a few of them. I kind of clustered a few that were kind of common so we can just go through them with a lot of clarity, hopefully by the end of this video. First one is, what were the initial challenges that you faced when you started your virtual assistant business? Now, the first one, to be honest, was kind of plotting out what would that mean once the EA and the client got matched. So at that point, it wasn't really much about lead gen yet. That would come in a little bit, basically making sure that there was a consistent flow of clients and EAs. But it was first of like, okay, now I have a client, now I have an EA for them. We've gone through the recruitment process. What would be next? And I had to really sit down and experiment a ton of times of what makes sense for the client and what makes sense for the EA. Now, within 2XU, we have a whole 90-day onboarding program now. That took me about 2 years to fully develop of what that looked like once a client was matched with an EA. And the reality of it is the reason why it was really important for me and why that was such a bottleneck versus everything else is we wanted to make sure that for the client and the EA, that one, the EA was working on the right things with the client. They weren't just being bombarded with tasks that they could not do. And on the other side is for the client to feel like, hey, right off the get-go in the first 30, 60, 90 days, I have my EA taking care of a lot of things within the business. So I wanted to make sure that there was a win on the client side, of course, because they're the ones making sure that they're getting an ROI for the EA. And for the EA is to guide them through the process of how to essentially kind of what we call the 2XU magic to get to the point where they're confident in working with a client and running their business. So that was kind of the first initial challenge that I had. But then later on, I did get to the point where I would, of course, find a lot of different ways, or I did a lot of different ways to get more leads. Hence how this YouTube channel actually started. It was one of the ways that I was able to get a lot of lead gen for a lot of the current clients that we have. I joined mastermind groups. I joined different programs basically to start getting people to know like, hey, this is what Leanne does. So that's kind of on that point. Back and forth depending on the timing. Sometimes recruitment is still a bottleneck of like finding the right person for the client because you really try to bespoke find the right EA for the client. We're not just plugging anyone into their business. So that kind of usually becomes a bottleneck. But yeah, the initial challenge was mapping out a way for the client to see the value of having an assistant, and also at the same time making sure that the assistant feels prepared, supported, ready as they take on this new role. Next question I got was, I'm reading it down from below on my computer. Starting out, what was your approach? Did you just place a VA and let the client take over the management of the VA, or right away you have a VA under your management? So for me, fully, the intention is that the EA or the VA has a manager or management inside of 2XU, or else what was the point? We would just be kind of a placement agency where we would just place the assistant with the client, and that was basically it. I had full intention of making sure that the assistant is supported to do what it is that they need to do. So all they need to do is to kind of show up for the client. So then of course the client gets to just show up. So that's kind of the sequencing that I had in my head. I didn't hire my first manager though until 3 years later. And that was one of the biggest mistakes that I ever did, was we get to the point where we had about 20 assistants inside of 2XU, and I was managing all of them and managing all of the clients. And you can probably imagine what happened of like too many balls in the air, and I wasn't able to catch all of them. So as soon as you have about 7 EAs, you probably need to hire a manager. Either you're promoting someone from within, let's say, fortunately they lost a client or they want a bigger challenge and you match the client with a new EA, you can promote that EA. Or what I did and what I've kind of been doing is hiring a manager from outside who might not have a executive assistant experience, but they understand, and their core, their love basically is taking care of the EAs, which is where our remote executive assistant success managers are. It's like they love taking care of their assistants, even though they don't have direct experience being an assistant themselves, is that they can still support the assistant because anything could be trainable and learnable as long as there's that love and drive to manage and take care of them. Next is, where did you start learning how to hire a virtual assistant? So for me, before I started 2XU, I had about 5 years experience of hiring online, whether that was helping out friends or for the book publishing company that I was previously the CEO of. So even before then, I did have a good grasp of what it looked like to recruit people, of how to get people in. At that point, we even had a physical office, so I would bring people through the office and walk them through, the whole recruitment process. So we had different systems already in place. And then when I did the course on how to hire an assistant, I took up a lot of the experience that I had there and my co-founder's experience on hiring specifically virtual assistants for other people. And we kind of created the system out of that. Now it has been tweaked a lot of times in the last 5 years. We now have an actual recruitment team. It's not just 2 people anymore. It's like 5-6 people who are going through the CVs, calling people up, having them go through the process. Not to mention that each applicant of ours goes through our success managers for the EA. So then for them, they're kind of filtering people through what they usually know, because they know best of the green flags and red flags when it comes to EAs coming in. So there's different structures that we put in place since then, but it did start with me learning already how to outsource and how to hire people online, and then kind of added that knowledge into being more niche specific with hiring virtual assistants. Next question I got was, when you're recruiting VAs, do you hire someone with minimal experience, or do you prefer someone with VA experience already? Now, I do get this question a lot, not just for people who want to start a virtual assistant business, but of course those who want to apply as a virtual assistant in 2XU. By the way, we're always hiring because we do have always incoming clients. So if you're a virtual assistant yourself, feel free to go to 2xu.com/careers. Anyway, it really depends on the client. So that's kind of the biggest thing of why it is really bespoke of like one-on-one, who the client needs, and then that's the person we look for. Is we might hire someone who has had 7 years experience as a virtual assistant, right? Like they're an applicant, they're great, but when the moment that they face the client might not like their attitude, or the client might not like, or the client might want them to have specific experience on this. So a lot of the time what ends up happening is we've hired people who had no executive assistant or virtual assistant experience before, but they have experience on a tool or a skill that the client really, really needs. And then for us, we train them in becoming an EA. So as a really good example, we have a couple of engineers in 2XU, like they're licensed engineers, but they didn't want to go to an office anymore. They wanted to work from home. So because of their systems mindset, it was easier for the client to help or have them start building out the systems within the business. Then for us, we were just teaching them or training them on, okay, this is the EA mindset, this is what it looks like, this is how you develop it with the client. So it really depends on, again, the client preferences, if they want someone to have specific VA experience, or they just want the experience or the skill set of a specific thing. Everything else we can train. Honestly, we can train almost anything inside of 2XU as long as someone is willing to learn, of course, and take action of it. Next is, what would be your best advice for someone looking to enter into this type of business? And honestly, I have a lot. The main one is focus on people. Like everything else, like systems, documentation, all of that can come second, as long as you have the right people with you. And this will take some figuring out, some finding out your own preferences as the boss, as the business owner, of like what kind of people you can work best with. Because for example, for me, it took me about 2 to 3 years to actually build a whole admin management team. And that's full with someone who's a client success manager, one who's a success manager for the EAs. And again, that took me a while to actually get there. And it was a lot of reasons of me, again, figuring out what are my own preferences of who I want to work with, and then how am I training them? Because of course, just because I like them doesn't mean always meant that they liked me. So there's also that back and forth of figuring out that relationship. And it's the same thing for the assistants, is that again, someone could have 7 years, 10 years experience being a virtual assistant. They've been doing it way before a virtual assistant was even being a thing. But if they don't have the right attitude or character, they won't last with that client. They won't stick with that client. So that was kind of one of the main lessons I learned really, is focus on, again, who you want to hire, who you want to work with. 2 is then how are you going to develop them? How are you going to keep them motivated? How are you going to keep them getting inspired? So within 2XU, we have different ways that we do that within our culture. And 3 is how you're going to keep them developed, is how are you going to keep upgrading their skills, upskilling them? How are you going to keep them wanting to drive themselves further than where they are, to kind of keep taking care of them? On the flip side, it's still people, but then the clients. I have made 1 or 2, 5 mistakes, more than that, of saying yes to a client even though they were not a fit culturally, just because we really needed the client at that time. And that has hurt us more, because then for the EA's point of view, it seems like they're just getting matched with anyone, and they're not even a good person, or they're not treating them right, or they're abuse is a strong word, but basically they're not just treating them as a real person. And of course that hurt our culture in the long run, because we keep getting clients who are not really good to our assistants, which then causes them to not be, feel that they're safe and they're taken care of, even despite all of the ways that we take care of them within 2XU. So you have to learn how to filter your clients as well. Even maybe from the beginning, is you want to find out if they're a good person, how they think of virtual assistants, how their past experiences of managing people. With actual questions of that inside of our onboarding. Is like, how do you usually manage people? How do you usually take care of people? And when we kind of see that this client might not be with us long term, or they might treat their assistant as well as we hope that they would, then we sometimes would even reject clients. Not always, because most of them come through pretty well, but that's one of the things, or the ways that we filter even our clients, not just the assistants or the employees coming into the business. Now, speaking of people and then systems, someone asked, what does someone need assistance wise, payroll, training plan, whatnot. This really depends on the resources that you have, as well as how kind of mapped out that you have for how you want the business to run. So for example, for me, I kind of took it 1 year at a time. To be honest, I had like a plan of like, okay, this year I want to make sure that this is in place inside of 2XU, and then added more into it and added more to it, because then I would get feedback of how the plan that I put out actually reverberated basically throughout the business. So as a really good example, like I said, my first focus was how can I onboard the client and the EA together, so then they have that set. Next thing, I kind of tackled the training process of then, okay, if the EA is coming in with a lot of social media marketing, but then the client also needs them to take care of admin, what is the training process for that? So for me, I already had a ton of resources running a book publishing company before, where I had access to different courses and books that I can give to other people or gift to other people. So then as an assistant basically came in, there was already kind of a training board that they could follow. Now for us, we did go to kind of a self-study, self-paced way, mostly because different EAs would be hired at different times. It didn't make sense for us to have people who've been here for a month and just hired kind of go through the same cycle. So we do have an induction process that's kind of the same, looks the same for everyone else. And we also have a specific training program for the assistant, depending on the tool and the skill that the client wants them to develop. So that's on the training plan. On the payroll, we are a Philippine registered company, so we follow a lot of the payroll laws here. And we did that because then we wanted to offer contributions for the assistant, their SSS, Pag-ibig, PhilHealth, their health insurance. That's already all included, and that can only be available if we are a Philippine corporation. Plus recruitment, it made it easy for us to have a wider net, because most of the recruitment sites in the Philippines will require that you have a corporation. Basically, they ask for certification and all that good stuff when you are signing up. So that was one of the other reasons why we did opt for essentially getting the Philippine corporation. And basically, we pay twice a month, again following the Philippine payroll. And the way that we have that is we have the US corporation, which is 2XU, and we also have a Philippine corporation. The 2XU basically sends the money for payroll into the Philippine corporation, and then that's how we disperse, basically using the local bank that we're using for payroll. So that's kind of one of the systems we have there. Now, that's just directly answering that. But setting up systems within 2XU, we do have a operation consulting service where we walk people through the process of like, hey, these are the assets that we've identified that you could use in your business. This is how we'll implement it. So for 2XU, I kind of did that a little bit reverse engineer, where I made sure that we had our vision or mission, mostly because then it gave us a little bit of a guiding light of whatever else that we did inside of 2XU. We were guided by this. We also have our values. So then when we're hiring people, we're filtering them based on those values. So every single system that we added into 2XU was to aid us to move forward in some way. One of the biggest books that I read, or my favorite books that I read on building systems within the business, was the book Traction by Gina Wickman. And for that book, basically, it gave us a lot of the structure that we currently have when it comes to us doing meetings, when it comes to our processes. Of course, we're big fans of standard operating procedures at 2XU. That's one of our biggest differentiators, is that we know how to build systems for our clients. So there was a lot of making sure that things were documented. There was a lot of making sure that if employee A and B took a vacation for 2 weeks, things can keep running. What does that look like for us? So there was a lot of that. And also, what if tomorrow we got 10 clients? how can we handle that? How can we take care of them through the recruitment and onboarding and then ongoing support of that EA? So we had a lot of stress tests of doing the whole creating the processes, and every single year it probably changes. There's a lot of different ways that we put that into place to make sure that we're supported. But again, we made it make sense for us. Now, I did look at other virtual assistant agencies. There's a ton of really, really good ones. I looked at how kind of hinted their systems and how they work. And I made it work for us of what made sense for us to take care of our assistants and our clients the best way that we can. I hope that I answered some of your guys' questions. If you have some more questions, feel free to comment them below. I might do a future video, or I might just, of course, just comment right back into your comment, answering your questions right there. I love doing that from time to time. Whenever I'm like, oh, there's like 5 comments on this one video, and like go through them. So feel free to do that. And if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the thumbs up button right there. And if you still haven't yet, make sure to hit the subscribe button right there so you don't miss any of my videos every Sunday and Thursday on how to work from home and how to run a business from home, which you guys can check out those 2 playlists right here and the latest video right here. I hope you guys have an amazing day, and remember that small steps matters, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!